This is Henry Wright, and I'm going to introduce you to the abstract expressionist. This group of artists is one of my favorite in American art history tradition. The reason is that this is the first time American artists have taken the stage internationally and shown that they are going to lead in the mode and method of presentation of images. I have on the screen an image from last year, the World Cultures 3 trip to the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum. I hope you recognize that and can think back to how much fun you had in that museum being challenged by objects that are not traditional art objects. Where did the idea of beauty go? Some of the things were just downright ugly. You'll be introduced to several artists in this presentation: Arshel Gorky, Jackson Pollock, Helen Frankenthaler, William de Kooning, and I suspect that you'll ask, why is that art? A kid could do this. Well, I hope to give you an opportunity to see this movement as something more than just misguided, ugly art. I'll begin with a clip from the movie Pollock, about the life of Jackson Pollock. I want you to think about the way the artist engages the canvas. One of the key critics from this time period described the movement as action painting. And you'll see that there's a relationship that's built between the artist and the canvas, and this enthusiasm and energy that's put into the scene. Harold Rosenberg, the art critic who coined the term action painting to describe the abstract expressionist movement, said, "At a certain moment, the canvas began to appear to one American painter after another as an arena in which to act. What was to go on to the canvas was not a picture, but an event. It is this psychic turmoil of the artist engaged with the canvas and the expression of the feelings and the anxiety onto that canvas. Jackson Pollock is a great example of that. That's why we call it abstract expressionism, the expression of this anxiety. Like the Cold War, you cannot appreciate the development of abstract expressionism without recognizing that it grew out of the Great Depression and the graphic horrors of World War II and the subsequent bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Take a look at this image by William de Kooning, early abstract expressionist who moved to the United States in 1926. This piece, entitled Woman One from 1950, hangs at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's tortured, it's broken and shattered. The subject matter that we would traditionally think of as the beautiful model sitting in the studio has been torn apart, ripped asunder. Colors come forward, angles and jagged shapes are what are left. Barnett Newman's quote sums up this sort of anxiety that was being dealt with by the artists of the abstract expressionist movement. He said, "We felt the moral crisis of a world in shambles, a world destroyed by a Great Depression and a fierce world war, and it was impossible at that time to paint the kind of paintings that we were doing: flowers, reclining nudes, and people playing the cello." I want to show you a sculpture by Barnett Newman. Some of you may have seen it. It's in front of the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. This sculpture is entitled Broken Obelisk, and I think it's a great illustration of his point. Something traditional is broken and turned upside down. William de Kooning was doing this, the traditional nude model, broken, torn apart, and presented in this stark expression on the canvas. So keep in mind that the context for the abstract expressionists really begins with the Great Depression and the trauma and anxiety of the financial collapse of the economy, loss of employment, loss of income. But also from the Great Depression came the opportunity for many of the abstract expressionists in the form of the New Deal policies. I want to show you one clip of FDR's inaugural address that you read last week.
I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. We face our common difficulties. They concern, thank God, only material things.
He's talking about the anxiety that pervaded the nation in the face of this economic crisis. Maybe something akin to what we're going through right now with the coronavirus and the shutdown of businesses and even this class. But there is a shining light coming through with the New Deal policies. The Works Progress Administration had a sub-program called the Federal Arts Project, and I've shown here a poster from it and my favorite logo, the eagle and the artist easel combined. This New Deal policy was to make sure that the artists were also receiving the funding to continue in their pursuits. Central to American culture was the artistic efforts of its culture. Many of the artists associated with the abstract expressionists were funded in part by the FAP. They were Arshel Gorky, Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, Robert Motherwell, Barnett Newman, Mark Rothko. Some of the artists were hired to paint murals, and others who were easel painters were required to produce a painting every 4 to 6 weeks to be displayed in a public location. Here's Arshel Gorky painting a mural at the Newark Airport in 1937. It was a series of 10 panels that he painted as part of the Works Projects Administration FAP. An interesting aspect of this story is that during World War II, Newark Airport was converted into a military base, and all of these art objects were painted over and lost to history until 1972, when some art history students knew that the paintings used to be there and rediscovered 2 of the panels, lost under 14 coats of paint. Art restorationists were able to peel back the layers and rediscover 2 of the panels. Here is one of the panels, entitled Aerial View from 1937. You can see that there's the abstract form of the United States, and the key cities are linked by dotted lines. An interesting aspect of this story of the FAP is that artists such as de Kooning, Rothko, and Gorky, leaders of the abstract expressionist movement, were kicked out of the program in 1937 because they weren't citizens of the United States. The life of Arshel Gorky is sad. He had a traumatic upbringing in Armenia, although that was the source of much of his inspiration. He loved the scenery of his childhood. He was born in Armenia in 1902, and his father immigrated into the United States in 1908. At this time, there was a fierce battle with the Turks and the oppression of the native populations. His mother died in 1919, and after that, he and his family members made an arduous trek through many of the port cities of Europe and finally into Ellis Island in New York in February 26th of 1920 when he immigrated to New York City. He was 18 years old, and at that point he decided he's going to recreate himself. He wanted to be an artist, and he did. He recreated the American art movement and brought with it some of the styles and traditions that were familiar in Europe, in particular Surrealism, that was the dominant style at that time. As I mentioned, there was much tragedy in the life of Arshel Gorky. In 1946, a studio fire destroyed much of his work. 2 years later, he was diagnosed and treated for cancer, and then in 1948, he had a car wreck which broke his neck and paralyzed his painting arm. In the midst of this anxiety and sorrow, he decided to take his own life, leaving a message to his family saying, "Goodbye, my loveds." In 1945, the Museum of Modern Art asked him a question. Tell us about your ancestry, your nationality, your background, and if you consider those things relevant to understanding your artwork. Gorky's answer is insightful into his style and methods. He said that the memories of his childhood, the memories of Armenia, continued to fill his mind. I was taken away from my little village when I was 5 years old, yet all of my vital memories are of these first years. These were the days when I smelled the bread, I saw my first red poppy, the moon. It was an innocent seeing. Since then, these memories have become an iconography. The shapes, even the colors, millstone, red earth, yellow wheat field, apricots. From this, you can see that he's built up a type of symbology that's going to become the form and structure of his paintings. The quote from Arshel Gorky that I have at the top of this slide, I think is insightful as well. They being the critics, forgot that while the artist never works outside of time, his art will go on to be merged gradually into the new art of a new age. What he means is that the art objects you create, the artist loses control of them, and they go on to become an expression of the era and age in which they were made. Here's a photo from 1912 of Arshel Gorky and his mother. This was taken to be sent to his father, who was already in the United States. And this is also a source of his childhood inspiration in the creation of one of his most famous paintings, The Artist and His Mother from 1926. You can see here that the dimensionality of a space has been compressed into planes of color. The colors are subdued. They're somber because this is part of his memories of this age and this person who has been lost to him.
My grandfather was a painter. I've heard stories of him all my life. His art, his memories, his lies, his death. The only remaining witness of his last years is my grandmother, Magoosh.
I was 19 when I first met Gorky. But he was so proud and high and fine-looking, and he had a mighty paintbrush. I was smitten immediately.
He was like a mysterious person in a fairy tale.
And did you know he'd committed suicide?
No, I didn't. I thought he died. Mummy didn't tell us.
Do you remember Gorky?
No.
Not consciously. I was not quite 3.
Gorky's mother died of starvation.
He lost her when he was very young.
He lied about his past. He was an Armenian refugee, but he hid it. He reinvented himself.
They were very happy on the whole, his memories. That's what he chose to tell me about. He really didn't see what I saw at all. He saw things in it, like things that he might have seen in his dreams or imagination.
That reflection on his ability to see things that others didn't see around him. This ties into the type of symbology that he created in his artwork. That was a connection between the old world of surrealism and now this new abstract expressionism in the United States. This painting, The Liver is the Coxcomb from 1944, was one of the most popular pieces by Arshel Gorky. André Breton, the founder of Surrealism, the intellectual branch of it, and the writer of the Surrealist Manifesto from 1924, commented after seeing this that this is one of the most important paintings made in America. He even later stated that Gorky was a surrealist, which I don't know if he was or not, but for Breton, that was the highest compliment that he could give. And here in this painting, you can see the bright colors, the loss of lines as they bleed into each other, and hints at things that would seem familiar, but they're sort of broken apart, so you're always left questioning. It is this layering of symbols that perhaps give you a meaning, but always are inviting the viewer into the conversation of interpretation. In contrast to the fuzzy lines of Arshel Gorky, his more vibrant style of Stuart Davis. He was described as the painter of the Jazz Age, an optimism, a life and enthusiasm in the paintings that some of the other abstract expressionists did not convey. He was a senior member of the Abstract Expressionists, also called the New York School. He was born in 1892 in Philadelphia and had already made a name for himself in the world of painting with the Ashcan School. He exhibited at the famous Armory Show, in which you had the intersection of the contemporary European art with American art that revolutionized the style of American art thereafter. Stuart Davis, as with many of his colleagues, was employed by the FAP and produced several paintings that received a little bit of criticism because they seemed to have a political Marxist tone to them. In the interpretation of Stuart Davis's work, there's the enthusiasm, the optimism, but perhaps a political subcurrent that is coming through. Here's a painting that hangs at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, and one of your former colleagues who's making a drawing studying the lines of this New Mexican landscape. The painting was done in 1923. Here's one of my favorite paintings of Stuart Davis, and I guess one of my favorite titles. It's entitled Egg Beater Number 2. I suspect Egg Beater Number 1 is just as good, and Egg Beater Number 15, I don't know what happened to it, may be lost, may not exist. The combination of the title and the forms within the painting suggests that there is an everyday object embedded here, a sense of recognition that is pushed back a bit, where you say, hey, I can't see it. What should it be about? What's the meaning here? It conveys almost an interior landscape, perhaps shadows and a doorway leading from one space to the other. Arshel Gorky particularly liked this painting. In 1931, he said, "This artist, whether he paints egg beaters, streets, or pure geometrical organizations, expresses his constructive attitude toward his successive experiences." An enthusiastic endorsement of the bright, bold style, the confident optimism, energy, and jazzy sensibility of Stuart Davis's paintings. But then we're struck with war again.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at solicitation of Japan, still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific.
The trauma and horrors of World War II culminated in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Here is an image of a standing Torii Gate the day after the bombing of Nagasaki, August 9th, 1945. Look at the way the objects have been broken apart, shattered. This is the same sort of psychic anxiety that the abstract expressionists have been grappling with in their creation of work. The chaos within this scene is reminiscent of the work of Jackson Pollock. In the same year, here is There Were 7 and 8 by Jackson Pollock, in which there are suggestions of shapes that would be recognizable, but they're all lost in this frenzy of lines and energy on the painting. Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock's wife, and also an artist in her own right, commented that Pollock's paintings often began with more or less recognizable energy. Their heads, parts of bodies, fantastic creatures. But these things are painted over, no longer obvious. She later inquired why he had not stopped when these images were exposed and shown. Jackson Pollock replied, "I chose to veil the imagery." Jackson Pollock is the icon of the American abstract expressionist movement. He is known for his splatter painting and drip painting. In a twist of irony, he received fame from Life magazine, declaring him to be one of the most important artists in 1949. In 1956, Time magazine called him Jack the Dripper in a derogatory piece. Tragically, Jackson Pollock's life ended in late 1956 when he had a car wreck on his property. Edith Metzger and he were killed, and another passenger was injured but survived. A quote from Jackson Pollock that I've included at the top of this slide offers some more insight into his style. He says, "It seems to me that the modern painter cannot express this age, the airplane, the atomic bomb, the radio, and the old forms of the Renaissance or of any other past culture." What he's suggesting is that the anxiety and trauma of the Great Depression, the World Wars, the end to the war, have shattered the traditional subjects of art. The pursuit of beauty does not make sense in the face of the ability to destroy a whole city with a single bomb.
I enjoy working on a large canvas. I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting, similar to the Indian fan fingers of the West. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping fluid paint. I also use sand, broken glass, pebbles, string, nails, or other foreign matter. The method of painting is the natural growth out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement. When I am painting, I have a general notion as to what I am about. I can control the flow of the paint. There is no accident, just as there is no beginning and no end. Sometimes I lose a painting, but I have no fear of changes, of destroying the image. Because a painting has a life of its own, I try to let it live.
You heard Jackson Pollock describe his method of painting and talk about the way the method itself is the expression. This relationship between the artist and the art object is a central feature of the abstract expressionist movement. The way the artist put the paint on the canvas, the particular forms that are created there through a sense of symbology, are typical of the styles of the abstract expressionists. This slide is showing you a painting entitled Number 11 from 1955 by Jackson Pollock. I particularly like this because it shows not just the chaos, but the way in which a form and a pattern can be pulled out from that chaos with a series of lines for verticality going across the canvas. Remember too that another name for this movement is action painting. There's a frenetic energy within the paintings. This is my son, HW, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I asked him to offer his interpretation of a Jackson Pollock painting, and this is his interpretation. I want to end with the work of Helen Frankenthaler. She's one of my favorite artists from this period. She was born in New York City in 1928. She studied with Rufino Tamayo, famous Mexican muralist. She was married to Robert Motherwell, who gets a lot of attention for his series of paintings on the Spanish Revolution. Helen Frankenthaler's style is known for the use of thin paints on an unprepared canvas. The effect is that the paint goes into the fabric and spreads in a sort of undetermined, random way, creating these wonderful pastel and shadowy forms. The way she describes her painting is, I would rather risk an ugly surprise than rely on things I know I can do. So the technique of the painting creates the art object, and there's a loss of control. This painting, entitled Mountain and Sea from 1959, shows this methodology of Helen Frankenthaler. At the top, you can see that there's this splatter painting, Jackson Pollock-esque, but the effect's totally different because the canvas is untreated and there's this blotching, an explosion of color. I also like the bright colors that Helen Frankenthaler uses in her palette. There's a sense of optimism and, in this case, a sense of nature, the sea and the mountains and the trees coming down in the intersection that can be so beautiful with just the colors. This painting reminds me of a quote from Frank O'Hara, a poet in New York City, also a curator and good friend of Helen Frankenthaler's. In 1959, he said, "The new painting does have qualities of passion and lyrical desperation, unmasked and uninhibited, not found in any other recorded era. It is not surprising that faced with universal destruction, we are told our art should at last speak with an unimpeded force, an unveiled honesty to a future which may well be non-existent." In the face of this anxiety, there is this beauty, and these new forms and a new language of art emerges. I'll leave you with this quote from Carl Jung, psychologist, who says, "The upheaval of our world and the upheaval in consciousness is one and the same. Everything becomes relative and therefore doubtful. And while man, hesitant and questioning, contemplates, his spirit yearns for an answer that will allay the turmoil of doubt and uncertainty. In that void of expression arose the abstract expressionist, giving a new image and style to the world of art. But you already know this. Here you are at the Kimball Art Museum and the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum, enjoying the expressions and the images of these great artists.